How you doing? Brent with Brent Lowe Photography and Washington Real Estate Photography in Bellevue, Washington. Here we've got a nice kitchen shot over the bar, and this is going to be our nice ceiling shot. And it looks like we've got it at 1/6 of a second. Aperture is 7.1, f7.1, ISO 320, and we're at 33 millimeters. So I was pretty far back and I zoomed in. And for this ambient exposure, we're just going to be using the ceiling. That's what I do, is I just use the ceiling. It's nice and white already, but we just go ahead and take an eyedropper tool and bring it over because I know this is the white ceiling. So it looks like there's a little bit of a change, but not much. Not much we can do about this over here, but that's okay. We could fix it, but it would take too much time. So anyway, we're gonna go ahead and move on since this looks really good for a ceiling. I'm happy with that. We're gonna move on to the shadows. This is the shadow ambient. So we're gonna just use a special sauce, as Rich Baum would say. I'm gonna bump up the exposure quite a bit. And that's looking pretty good. Maybe a little bit down. That'll do. And then here we've got the flash shot. So here I've got flash directly behind the camera, and then over here camera right, and then over here I wanted to make sure that I got this corner, this back corner, because as you can see it's not bright over here and it's not bright here. So we'll just take all three of these, special shot or special sauce. Thank you, Rich Baum. And as you can see, it's really nothing special. It's a little bit of exposure, which I always change, it seems. Just bringing down the highlights, up the shadows, pump up the whites, bring down the blacks, add a little bit of clarity and vibrance. And of course, as I bring in all of my photos, I always have them auto lens correction profile added. I use a Sony. I use the Sony a7 Mark II, and I've got a Zeiss Sony lens 16-35. So that's nice. Auto brings it in. I don't actually mess with anything in the transform section yet. I do that after we bring them back out of Photoshop. So anyway, we're going to go back, we're going to look through these, make sure everything looks pretty good that we'll be needing. And yeah, so I go a little bit too far sometimes as far as time length for editing photos. I have a perfection problem. But it's perfection in my mind. I'm certainly not. The picture's certainly not perfect. It's far from perfect. But anyway, I'm no Mike Kelly, so hopefully someday we'll get there. But we're bringing it into Photoshop now, and as Rich Baum always says, it's always important to have a solid state drive, and this is why. It'll make this process go a whole lot faster. Right now I've got so many apps running that it's a little bogged down, and surprisingly I'm not sure if going to full frame was the right choice for normal residential because the file sizes are so much larger. I'm working with about 20 megs each file, 18 to 24 probably each file. So it's a lot to bring in and for Photoshop to recognize and read. But it just goes through and compiles the layers. Something that you might want to think about is I don't always need to flash camera left and camera right. I usually just do behind the camera, and that should be sufficient unless there's multiple rooms showing. So this is going to be our ceiling layer, and so I'm just going to bring that down here. I bring my shadows in last. That's my last step for me. I'm going to bring this directly behind the camera flash. You can see me right here. I'm going to bring this down to the first layer. So it goes from bottom to top, layer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we're working from bottom up. You always want to start like this. You always want to keep your base layer on the bottom and then work your way up. So we'll go with, let's see, which one do we want to work with first? This looks good. We'll work with this one first. So here we're going to make a layer mask, and we do that by holding Alt or Option and click this little Add Vector Mask. Make sure that you've got your brush set onto 0 hardness. Size will be variant. You want your flow generally between 3 and 8%. I like 4%. For whatever reason, my computer seems to be a little bit heavier on the new Photoshop. I'm not sure why, but anyway. So we're going to paint in the ceiling just by creating the layer mask. As you can see, it's black, and we're going to paint in the ceiling by selecting white over here. You can interchange black and white using X. So we're going to use white to uncover the layer mask. You're painting in the portion of the picture that you want, which is not what I'm doing. So we're just going to go ahead and delete that because I forgot what I was working on, and we're going to do it correctly over here because that's what we wanted out of this layer, is just this section over here. And it looks much better. As you can see, quite a difference, and that's what we want to see. We'll go ahead and paint this in too, because that'll get rid of the behind the camera problem. So as you can see here, this is where I painted, and this is the white, and the black is the hidden section, and it's already improved. And sometimes I don't even use all the layers, but it looks like I'll probably be using some of this layer too for this back section on the right. I really wanted this image to pop because I really like bar shots over the bar into the kitchen shots. I think they show nicely and add a nice pop to the photos. Go ahead and add a little bit of, well, I don't really like that. We'll wait for the ambient to mess with that. All right, so here we've got the ambient, and I love the ceiling ambient, so I probably won't just use it for the ceiling. But anyway, as you can see, this is what improved and changed from this next layer that I worked on by adding the vector mask. Again, we're going to do that with this layer. I'm going to show the layer by pressing the eyeball tool, and then we're going to go down to the vector mask again. We're going to press Alt or Option and click it, and then that will hide that layer. Now we're going to paint in what we want to show using white on 4% and 0 hardness. I got to this hardness screen by right-clicking the mouse anywhere on the screen. And so we're going to paint in sections that we want to be shown. Get some natural shadows coming in. That's always important. You don't want to have a giant flash where it's obvious. I once read somewhere that the object of real estate photography is to not be able to tell how they did it. I don't know how true that is, but it's sometimes what I go for. Getting underneath the cabinets, I notice, is a good idea usually too. So as you can see, there's a shadow from the chandelier here casting on the wall. And there's nothing I can do about that because, well, maybe I'm wrong. There we go. Maybe I just wasn't on painting correctly. Yeah, I was on black. So that's my fault. I make a lot of mistakes. And I always use the ambience to paint in the stainless steel because the blacks show up nicer and everything turns out real well. And we want to make sure, since we did a lot of work over here, that we're not getting into any of the window painted in. So we're going to make sure that we switch by pressing X to black and painting with the black over the windows. And I used a lot of ambient. As you can see, there's a lot of white showing, so I used a lot of ambient. And if you want to change that a little bit, you can actually lower the opacity a little bit and find the sweet spot which you like. And I'm going to go with 89%, I think. We're going to come back in here. Is there anything that I want to use? So I've got a big bright spot right here that I don't like. So we're going to just paint black right there to cover it up. That's much better. And looking. Don't really see anything. We can always, you can get rid of the natural shadows if you want a little bit. But you don't want to get rid of them all. What happens if we just... Yeah, that just looks terrible. Quick strokes is all I'm doing. Just quick brush strokes, like you're painting. All right, let's see. Quite a difference the ambient makes. And as I said, I did a lot of ambient work, but I think it turned out pretty nice. Maybe a little bit too much up there. And I think that's good. I don't even need, oftentimes I don't need this extra layer, the shadow layer, because this one ambient layer does all the work I need. So I can just flatten the layer by right-clicking the background and then flatten image. That's how I did that. And then I go into here and I've got an action set already. You can always make actions that are nice and easy. And it's just to auto contrast and auto my levels. So these two right here, the brightness and contrast, and the levels. And that made it a little bit too much, so I'm going to go in and lower the contrast. I always try and get this bar right at the tip of where the spike leaves, and then I bring this back up to make it nice and bright, because that's what real estate wants. And that looks pretty good. And maybe a little bit, maybe just a little bit less. There we go. Just one. Oh, looks good. I'm happy with that. I'll go ahead and flatten by right-clicking, going down to flatten, and then I'll do Command on a Mac or the Windows key on a Windows, and so Command S and then Command W, or the Windows key on a Mac, Windows machine. Then I go back into Lightroom, bring Lightroom back up, and this is the result from coming from Photoshop, and it has drastically improved from both the flash, this is behind the camera flash, and here's the ambient. This is the one ambient that we worked, this is the one ambient that we worked with for the ceiling mostly, but we used a lot of other pieces. So it turned out like this. So we're going to go ahead and do excuse me, I got the hiccups. The final bump, which is just a little more clarity. I'm going to bring down the clarity on this a little bit. And maybe a little bit of less contrast. And go down here. This is where I mess with the transform. I've got my final bump set to vertical. But then I have to come down here and press update, and that usually fixes any any real small errors. I always like to look, especially on single point composition shots, which are straight on to the wall shots, not diagonal. I always like to look and see if the level, or especially the auto, has any difference from the vertical. And I usually just go by eyeball on this, whichever one looks better to me. And I'm going to say the vertical looks better up in the cupboards. So yeah, that's my workflow. And I guess we'll go ahead and export that. This was a live process. I hadn't done this before, this shot specifically before. So that worked out well. We'll do one more, and this is another single point composition, just facing the other direction. But I think I'm going to go with a diagonal shot. It gives a little more flavor because we got windows to deal with here, and a lot of back area, which is going to be interesting. So anyway, here we got the a flash shot. I had my flash a little bit high on power. I use a Sony, like I said, A7 Mark II, and for lighting I use a Streaklight 360. It's real power. It's a lot of power, probably more than I need for this house, but I always like having more than less. So I'd like to get an 80-200, but it's AD as in dog, 200. But the 360 works definitely well. Let's go ahead and do my special sauce on the flash shots. Go through the flash shots, see if this other flash shot has anything that one does not, other than the blown out area right here. And that back wall looks a little brighter. We got some brightness over here, so we might use it, we might not. We'll continue on to see what we've got over here. And this is where I flashed for this back area back here. We'll go ahead and brighten that bad boy up and bring down the exposure. And then I walked over here so that I could get myself, so I'm going to paint where I am right now with this image. So when we bring it into Photoshop, I'll layer them and use this photo to paint where I'm standing. So you won't see me anymore. And it'll be better than me standing there. But we'll go ahead and do the special sauce for this, and that looks better. Cool. Then we'll go into here, and this is going to be our ceiling shot, and this is a great example of when I've got my flash, we've got lots of natural light coming in and bouncing off this orange wall and the cupboards and the floor and hitting the ceiling. And this is where we've got this huge orange glow. And here we're at 1/6 second again. This is a pretty standard shutter speed for ceiling shots in this house. For this kind of day, it really varies. It really does vary depending on the color and how bright it is inside and out, how much sun's shining through. 7.1. We're at 16 millimeters, wide as we can go here. For diagonal shots, I often go pretty wide. And for the single point compositions, I often go a little bit in. I try and zoom in for those. But anyway, back to work. We'll get the eyedropper tool and we'll put it on the ceiling, because I know the ceiling is white and it looks still a little bit orange in areas, but we'll go over here. And now this is where it gets interesting, because you can see it's a lot of blue. You got a lot of blue. So you're going to come down here. You're going to wipe out that blue by just bringing the blue saturation all the way down in the hue, saturation, and luminance tab in Lightroom. And that gives us a very stark white ceiling, almost too stark white, So we're going to just bring that back up just a little bit on the yellow hue tinge, white balance, And that looks a little more natural. Okay, so we've got the ceiling covered, and then we'll see the shadows. We'll just bring that bad boy to probably right there if we do end up needing it. I'm going to go ahead and bring down the saturation for the orange and yellow while I'm at it. So we're going to go in, we're going to select all the images that we've gotten pre-filled, pre-done, ready to be opened as layers in Photoshop. And I just right-clicked, edit in, open as layers in Photoshop. And so the wait begins. This really takes a long time, this part. My workflow is definitely slower than most because I go maybe a little bit too far in editing and taking time to make sure everything is where I want it. But that's how you get better, and that's how you get the better paying gigs. If you want to stay in one spot, you go ahead and do HDR, or don't. Do the best job you can every time. But that's what I always recommend, is doing the best job you can every time. Whether it's a $100,000 house or a $3 million house. I saw a link, a realtor sent me a link today of a $3 million house that just used flat HDR, just plain HDR'd it, and it was just, oh God. The cabinets were terrible. Anytime you use HDR and you've got like black or dark cabinetry, you're gonna have problems. Unless you're really good. I've seen amazing HDR artists and I don't know how they do it. And I'm saying HDR very loosely. I could also mean exposure fusion. But that's another topic. So anyway, here we've got the ceiling layer. Looks great, looks fantastic. We'll get rid of that for right now. This is the shadow shot. We'll put this on top. If we need it, it'll be there. Here we've got the behind the camera. That's probably overlit right here, so we might not use that. Here we've got the corrected version of that shot. And here we've got me getting the back area, so we'll go ahead and put that as third. And here we've got me over here to finish up the flash shots. So again, I've got my shadows on the top. I've got my ceiling next. And then I've got a cover up for when I cover up this shot right here using this shot. So I moved over there and I'm going to paint this in. And then I've got this shot and I got this shot. So I might not even use this shot. So we'll just bring that to the bottom and ignore it. And so we'll start with this one. We'll go and boom. Just did the layer mask again. Option or Alt on Windows, I believe. Oh, sometimes I hit the wrong button. Excuse me. There we go. Brush, 4%, flow, 0 hardness. I'm just going to paint that bad boy in. It's looking better already. And then we'll move on to, actually we might be able to get a little bit of floor action over here and some action over here. Yeah. So anytime you can make a flash shot better for the ambient, before the ambient, I always recommend doing that because it just results in better work. here I am using I did just another quick layer mask over the shot that's going to be used to cover up myself. See how I did that? There I am from this shot, because I was using a lot of this shot to brighten up the darkened areas that I couldn't get my flash to because I was back here. So I went into the middle of the room, I used the flash, and got a lot of great light back there, but I ended up with some of myself in the shot. Just want to make sure. Is that all I can get out of that? Yeah, that's all I can get. So anyway, we went to this shot, added the layer mask, and this is what it gave us. I'm going to try and get some of those shadows in there. That's nice. Yeah. Looks good. Great. Cool. Okay. So that's what it was, and that's where it went. Yeah, we got some nice shadows going in now down here in the cabinetry. I love that. Looks good. All right, now we're going to move on to the ceiling. And this is one of my favorites parts, and we just paint. See, you've got a problem over there because I brought out all of the saturation essentially. So we're going to have another trick up our sleeve to hopefully get rid of that ceiling fan shadow that was cast on the wall over here. So we'll see if we can get rid of it. I'll brighten that up a little. Brighten this up a little. Okay. All right, so this is where our shadow layer comes in handy, because we're going to use that to get rid of the ceiling fan shadow back there. And we're going to add a little bit of nice shadow right there. We want to lead our viewers into the brighter areas, which are the sink, the cabinets, the nice flooring. No, we're not going to do that. And we're not going to do that either. Okay, so that looks much better. This is the shadow layer that I added. And again, sometimes you don't use the shadow layer, and sometimes you do. So with the ceiling layer, I've got a hot spot there from the, I'm guessing a window, but that could be just light. So we're going to just take out a little bit of that layer, and I just fixed it pretty well. And so yeah, so that's what we get, and we'll go back. This is what we started with, and I'll go in order of how we did it. Base flash layer behind the camera, onto in the middle of the room, flashed the darkened area on the right and left, and then I went over to the left hand side and flashed for the area that I was standing in, and then I used the ambient ceiling layer to brighten the ceiling a lot and brighten up other things in the room and correct as many shadows as I could. Then I used the shadows layer, surprisingly enough, to correct the shadow. So shadow to replace the shadow. I love it. And then that's it. So we're going to go in, we're going to flatten the image. We'll discard this bottom layer that I didn't use because it was overlit. That looks pretty good so far. It gets better. We're going to go in here, click on our action, and this just does, again, the brightness and contrast and the levels auto. It just auto action. And this is what I get out of it, and it just is usually faster, so I just bring that back and try and make that at the tip and bring this back up to about that. So that's that. This is the image that we're going to be bringing back into Lightroom. That's going to be Command S or Windows key S, Command W to bring it back into Lightroom. Or to close it. All right, so it's back in Lightroom. We're going to final bump that bad boy. And we've got a little bit more shadow back here that I didn't really want. So we're going to see if we can bring down the clarity a little bit. And that looks pretty good. Might lower the highlights in this floor a little bit. Just see if that does anything. And the stove. And then we'll go and do the update for transform to make it vertical. Check the auto. See which one you like better. I'm going to go with vertical again on this. It's not always vertical, I promise. It's not always the best one, I feel. So there you have it. We'll see again. Let's see. This is the flash shot that we originally started with. And sometimes photographers would just do this and call it good. Well, mainly realtors would just call that good if they were shooting it themselves. And then here we've got the ambient. And some photographers will just call this good. Or this. So that's the ambience. That's the base flash layer. And that's the final version. Not bad. Not bad at all. If you really want to get fancy, you can come down here and do a little bit of dehaze. And that just adds a bit more pop, but don't add too much because you get crazy with it. All right, so if there are ways to get rid of this glare here, it's not really ideal to do it in regular real estate where you're trying to get in and out within an hour, hour and a half. But you can always overpower the sunlight, and that should help. So we'll go ahead and export with previous, and that's all that we've got. I'm going to continue on editing, but those are the two that I'll do for now. Thanks for watching. Again, this is Brent Lowe with Brent Lowe Photography and Washington Real Estate Photography in Bellevue, Washington. Have a great day.